All right. Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be tackling something that I know has got a lot of people talking. It's the potential transfer of Hoskins Sotutu.
Oh, yeah.
We've got all these news articles and reports flying around
Mm.
suggesting that he might be leaving New Zealand, heading north
The Northern Hemisphere.
to the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And, when you start to think about the implications of a move like that for both the club scene, the international scene,
Right.
it's pretty huge, right?
Yeah, absolutely massive.
We're potentially talking bidding wars. We're talking,
Shifting national team
the
strategies.
shifting national team strategies, maybe even a whole new
Landscape.
landscape for the sport. So,
Yeah.
it is exciting. But before we get too far down that road, I think it's important to sort of set the stage for folks who might not be, totally up to speed on all things Hoskins Sotutu. So can you maybe give us a little bit of a rundown on who he is and why this potential move is such a big deal?
Absolutely. So Hoskins Sotutu is a back rower. And I guess for those who may not be as familiar with rugby, the back row, they're kind of the engine room of the team. They're involved in pretty much every aspect of the game, from attack to defense. And so Tutu, he's really known for his incredible power, especially when he's carrying the ball. I mean, the
Okay.
guy's like a human battering ram.
Yeah, and he's got the accolades to back it up too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was named the Super Rugby Pacific MVP just last year in 2024. So yeah, he's definitely the real deal.
MVP. Okay, so we're not talking about just an average player here. We're talking about someone who is at the top of his game,
Yeah, he's world class.
but he's already playing for the All Blacks,
Right.
one of the historically dominant teams in the history of the sport.
Mm.
I mean, why would he even consider leaving?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
What's the motivation here?
Well, there are a few things at play. I think first you've got the club scene, and there are strong rumors that Gloucester Rugby, a team over in the English Premiership, they seem to be the front runners to sign him. And it makes sense they're potentially losing some of their key back row players. Zach Mercer, Ruan Ackerman, Albert Tuishu, big names, all of them. So bringing in Sotutu would not only fill that gap, but also elevate their game significantly.
So it's kind of like a classic win-win, right? Gloucester gets a superstar to bolster their squad, and so Tutu gets
Well,
what, more playing time, a bigger paycheck? I mean,
it's probably a combination of things, to be honest.
yeah,
I mean, you can't ignore the financial aspect of professional sports.
of course. Yeah.
But I think there's more to it than that.
Okay.
So Tutu is actually eligible to play for England through his mother. And I think that's a huge factor in all of this.
Oh, right, because of that World Rugby rule about the 3-year stand-down period after a player's last appearance for a nation.
Exactly. You can't just switch teams on a whim. There are rules in place, and players have to serve that waiting period before they can represent a new country.
So where does that put Sotutu in terms of eligibility?
Well, his last appearance for the All Blacks was back in 2022, which means he could potentially be eligible to play for England by November 2025.
Hold on, November 2025.
Just in time for the next World Cup cycle.
Just in time for the next World Cup cycle. Okay, so now things are getting really interesting.
That's a storyline you couldn't script.
So England
Okay.
potentially gets a World Cup boost, and New Zealand risks losing a key player to a rival.
And a fierce rival at that.
It's a scenario that's got to have everyone talking. But let's not forget about the clubs themselves, right?
True.
We've got Gloucester, who are apparently in the lead. But I've also heard rumors that Saracens and Leicester Tigers are interested in Sotutu as well.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely in the mix. The Premiership has become incredibly competitive in recent years, and clubs are always on the lookout for players who can give them an edge.
And with those central contracts worth, what, something like £160,000, it's a pretty enticing offer for any player.
Absolutely. Those central contracts are a game changer. They give the clubs more financial muscle to attract top talent from around the world.
But let's go back to this international intrigue for a second.
Yeah,
I mean, if Sotutu does choose England, that's a big statement, don't you think?
absolutely. It would raise all sorts of questions about shifting priorities in the world of rugby. Is it about playing time? Is it ambition? Are the financial incentives just too good to refuse? Or is it a combination of all those things? It's a complex decision with a lot of moving parts, and we can't underestimate the personal factors driving Sotutu's choice.
Right. At the end of the day, this is his life, his career.
Exactly.
And speaking of personal factors, there was something in one of those articles that mentioned Sotutu actually had a conversation with Steve Borthwick, England's head coach.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
What do you make of that?
Well, it shows how serious England is about bringing him on board. National teams often plan years in advance, identifying key players and building strategies around them. They're playing the long game with an eye on future tournaments.
Like a high-stakes game of chess.
Yeah, but with more scrums and tries.
And speaking of strategic moves, we can't overlook Sotutu's recent performance in the NPC, the National Provincial Championship,
Right.
in New Zealand.
Yeah.
He was absolutely brilliant, especially after missing the All Blacks Autumn Tour.
It makes you wonder if that was a calculated move on his part. A way to stay in the spotlight, remind everyone of his value, and maybe even signal his availability to potential suitors.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's all part of the game within the game.
So we get this whole mix of things, right?
Right.
Club rivalries, international ambitions, a player who seems to be, holding all the cards.
It's a fascinating situation.
This is getting good, but there's another layer to this story that we haven't even touched on yet.
Really?
And it involves a nation that might surprise you.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
We've been so focused on England and New Zealand that we haven't even considered Fiji.
Fiji.
Wait, how do they fit into all of this?
Well, Sotutu's father is Fijian, which means he's eligible to play for them as well.
Hold on a second. I thought we were talking about, England versus New Zealand.
I know, right?
Now we've got Fiji in the mix, too. This is getting complicated.
It adds a whole new dimension to the story.
It does, because now we're not just talking about, contracts and championships.
Right.
We're talking about identity, legacy,
Representing your heritage on the world stage.
and potentially inspiring an entire nation of rugby fans.
And for Fiji, acquiring a player of Sotutu's caliber would be monumental. It could elevate their standing in international rugby and make them a real force to be reckoned with.
So now we've got a three-way tug-of-war for this rugby superstar. England wants him for their World Cup ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
New Zealand might be trying to hold on to him so he doesn't go to a rival. And Fiji offers this, incredibly powerful connection to his family's roots.
It's a fascinating mix of personal and professional motivations.
And let's not forget about the clubs. They're all watching this unfold, knowing that Sotutu could be the missing piece of their championship puzzle.
They're all waiting with bated breath to see where he lands.
It really highlights how sports are so much more than just, wins and losses. They're a reflection of our values, our aspirations, the choices that we make in life.
I think that's a brilliant point. You hit the nail on the head there.
All right, so we've got all these factors swirling around Sotutu. But if you had to put your money on it, where do you think he ends up?
Honestly, it's anyone's guess at this point. The decision ultimately rests with Sotutu. But if I had to speculate, I'd say England seems to be the front runner. They have the resources, the ambition, and they've already made contact with him.
So we might be witnessing the birth of a new English rugby hero.
It's certainly a possibility, one that's got English fans buzzing with excitement.
But wouldn't that be a bitter pill for New Zealand to swallow, losing a player of Sotutu's quality to a rival nation?
It would definitely sting, but it also highlights this evolving landscape of international rugby.
You're saying that player movement is becoming more common, more fluid?
Absolutely. With eligibility rules and the allure of lucrative contracts, players have more options than ever before, and that's creating some really interesting dynamics in the sport.
So the future of rugby might be less about, national boundaries and more about individual choices.
In many ways, yes. Players are becoming global citizens, weighing their options and choosing the path that aligns with their own goals and values.
Which brings us right back to Sotutu. This isn't just a transfer. This is a player at a crossroads, a decision that could, redefine his career and reshape the rugby landscape as we know it.
It's a moment in time that will have ripple effects for years to come.
And as we wait for his decision, we can't help but wonder what factors will weigh most heavily in his mind.
What will his legacy be?
These are the questions that keep us coming back for more, right?
Absolutely. The human drama, the strategic maneuvering, the sheer unpredictability of it all.
That's the beauty of sport.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But before we get too philosophical,
Right.
we can't forget about the practical implications of Sotutu's decision. What does this mean for the clubs involved?
Yeah.
How will national team strategies adapt?
Those are excellent questions, and to answer them, I think we need to delve a bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of club dynamics and the intricacies of international rugby.
Ooh, a cliffhanger.
I know how to keep our listeners on the edge of their seats.
All right, deep divers, before we let you go, let's bring it all back home. So we started this deep dive by talking about the potential transfer of Hoskins Sotutu.
A transfer that has the potential to shake up the entire rugby world.
We've explored the potential impact on both club and international rugby and the factors that might be driving Sotutu's decision.
The ambition, the finances, the lure of representing different nations.
We've talked about Gloucester's potential gain, England's World Cup hopes, and even the possibility of Sotutu choosing Fiji and the emotional weight that would carry.
It's a story with so many layers.
And it's a reminder that sports aren't played in a vacuum. They're woven into the fabric of our lives, our personal journeys, national identities, and global connections.
It's a microcosm of the world we live in.
And that brings us to our final thought for all of you listening out there. If you were Hoskins Sotutu standing at this crossroads, what would matter most to you?
Would it be the chance to win trophies with a powerhouse club, the allure of representing a nation on the world stage, or perhaps the pull of ancestral ties and the chance to inspire a generation?
It's a decision with no easy answers, a choice that could reverberate through the rugby world for years to come.
And while we wait for Sotutu's announcement, we're left to ponder the possibilities, the what-ifs, and the potential ripple effects.
Who knows what the future holds?
That's the beauty of it all.
But one thing's for sure, we'll be here deep diving into the next chapter of this captivating story.
Absolutely. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those deep diving minds engaged.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
See you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating situation. And we haven't even really talked about, the strategic implications of Sotutu's decision.
Yeah, like if he chooses England, for example,
Right.
what kind of impact could he have on their game plan? How would they utilize a player like him?
Well, England has always, prided themselves on having a really strong set piece, a very kind of structured, forward-oriented style of play.
And for the listeners who might not be, super familiar with rugby terminology, what exactly do you mean by set piece?
Sure. So in rugby, a set piece is basically a structured restart of play that happens after certain stoppages in the game.
Okay.
So like if there's a penalty or the ball goes out of bounds,
Right.
there are specific ways that the game restarts, and two of the most common set pieces are the scrum and the line out.
Okay.
So a scrum is basically this contest of strength where the forward packs from both teams, they bind together and they push against each other to try to win possession of the ball.
So it's like a really intense shoving match.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a real test of power and technique. And then a line out happens when the ball goes out of bounds and it's thrown back in from the sidelines. And usually the taller players, they jump up and try to win the ball.
I see.
So those are two examples of set pieces. And England, they rely on those set pieces and their powerful forward pack to really control the game.
Okay, so they're all about that, strength and structure and kind of grinding it out.
Exactly. And that's where Sotu would fit in perfectly. I mean, he's an absolute beast in the scrum, and his ability to break tackles and gain yards after contact would add a whole new dimension to England's attack. He could be the missing link they need to unlock those really tight defenses and score more tries.
Interesting. And what about on the flip side? What about New Zealand? How would they cope with losing a player of his Tutu's caliber?
It would definitely be a blow for them. The All Blacks, they've always had this reputation for producing world-class back rowers, but Sotutu's departure would leave a pretty significant gap in their squad.
So would they try to replace him with a similar kind of player? Or would they maybe try to adapt their strategy a little bit,
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, New Zealand has a lot of talented young players coming through the ranks, but finding someone with Sotutu's specific skill set, that's not going to be easy. They might have to tweak their game plan a little bit, maybe focus on other areas of strength.
Right. And what about if Sotutu chooses Fiji?
Oh, man.
What would that mean for their national team?
That would be massive for Fiji. I mean, they've always been known for their flair and their athleticism, but they've sometimes lacked the consistency and the structure to really compete with those top-tier nations. Adding a player like Sotu would give them a huge boost in both those areas.
Can you imagine the scenes in Fiji
Oh, I can only imagine.
if he were to announce,
Oh, it would be absolute pandemonium.
that he was joining their team?
Fiji is a rugby-mad nation, and Sotutu's decision to represent his father's homeland, it would be seen as, a real sign of commitment to his heritage and a chance to inspire a whole new generation of Fijian rugby players. It would be a truly remarkable story.
It would be about so much more than just rugby, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It would be about family identity, the power of sport to unite and inspire people.
Mm-hmm. It's really what makes this whole situation so captivating, right? It's not just about, the technicalities of a transfer. It's about the human element, the personal stories, the broader impact it could have.
It's a narrative that transcends the sport itself.
Absolutely. And then speaking of, kind of the different teams involved, we've talked about Gloucester's need for a back rower, but what about Saracens and Leicester? What are their motivations for wanting to sign Sotutu?
Good point.
Yeah.
Each club has its own unique set of circumstances and ambitions.
Right. Let's break it down a little bit. So
Yeah.
Saracens, they're a team that's, always been known for their ambition, their willingness to invest in top talent.
Saracens, they're a club that's used to winning. They've won multiple Premiership titles and European championships in recent years, and they're always looking to add players who can help them maintain that dominance.
Would you say that Sotutu fits their style of play?
Absolutely. Saracens, they play a very structured and disciplined game with a big focus on strong defense and clinical finishing.
So Tutu's physicality and his work rate would really complement that.
Oh, without a doubt. He'd slot right into their system.
Okay, so Saracens, they see him as kind of like a key piece in their quest for more silverware.
Mm-hmm.
And what about Leicester Tigers?
Leicester is a team that's been on the rise in recent years. They won the Premiership title back in 2022, and they've got this young, exciting squad that's full of potential.
So where would Sotutu fit into their plans?
Well, Leicester, they have a bit more of a free-flowing style of play compared to Saracens. They like to move the ball quickly, attack from all angles.
So Sotutu's ball-carrying abilities would be a major asset for them.
Absolutely. He could be the spark that ignites their attack and helps them break down those tough defenses.
It's interesting how each club kind of sees him as a solution to their specific needs.
Right.
And I'm sure the financial aspect of things plays a role as well.
Oh, of course. Money talks in professional sports, and these clubs are all willing to offer big money to secure Sotutu's services.
Which brings us back to this bigger trend we've been discussing, player movement in rugby. It's becoming increasingly common.
It's true. We're
Yeah.
seeing more and more players crossing national borders and switching clubs in search of new opportunities and challenges.
And what do you think is driving this trend?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. I mean, the professionalization of rugby has led to increased competition, bigger contracts, which has made players more mobile.
Right.
And then you've got the eligibility rules, which have made it easier for players to represent different nations.
Right.
So it's created more options and flexibility for the players.
So are we entering this new era of rugby where national boundaries are becoming less significant and players are becoming more like global athletes?
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good thing for the sport. It's creating more competition, more excitement, more opportunities for players to showcase their talents on a global stage.
It's definitely making things more interesting for fans.
Absolutely. We get to witness these high-stakes transfer sagas, the clashes of national pride, and these incredible individual journeys.
Yeah.
It's what makes rugby such a compelling sport to follow.
Absolutely. And speaking of individual journeys, we can't forget about the one at the center of all of this, Hoskins Sotutu. He's the one who has to weigh all these factors, make this life-altering decision, and ultimately chart his own path.
It's a decision that could define his legacy, and it's one that we'll all be watching closely.
Mm-hmm. So while we wait for that decision, let's take a step back and consider the bigger picture here.
Okay.
What does this whole saga tell us about the state of rugby in 2025?
Well, I think it highlights the fact that rugby is a sport in transition.
Okay.
It's becoming more global, more competitive, and more dynamic than ever before.
And that's probably a good thing, right? I mean,
I think so. It's keeping the sport fresh, exciting, and relevant, and it's creating opportunities for new stars to emerge and for new stories to be told.
and as we've seen in this deep dive, those stories can be pretty captivating.
Indeed, they can.
All right, deep divers, we've covered a lot of ground in this episode. We've explored the potential impact of Hoskins Sotutu's transfer on both the club and international scene.
We've analyzed the motivations of the clubs, involved the implications for national team strategies, and that broader trend of player movement in rugby.
We've talked about England's World Cup hopes, New Zealand's potential loss, and Fiji's emotional connection to Sotutu's heritage.
And we've considered that human element at the heart of this story. A talented young player at a crossroads facing a decision that could shape his career and leave a lasting mark on the sport.
And now as we approach the end of this deep dive, we're left with one final question for you, our listeners.
If you were in Hoskins Sotutu's shoes, what would you do?
Would you chase trophies with a powerhouse club like Saracens? Would you answer the call of national duty and represent England on the world stage?
Or would you follow the pull of your heritage and strive to make history with Fiji?
It's a decision with no easy answers.
Mm.
A choice that could have far-reaching consequences for the future of rugby.
And as we wait for Sotutu's announcement, we can only speculate about the possibilities and anticipate the next chapter in this captivating saga.
So until then, deep divers, keep those rugby minds engaged. Keep exploring the world of this incredible sport and keep those conversations going.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of rugby.
We've talked about the clubs and the national teams and, the financial side of things, but ultimately this is Hoskins Sotutu's decision.
It is.
And it's a decision that's going to be influenced by, all sorts of things, his personal ambitions, his career goals, maybe even a sense of destiny.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this whole thing so compelling. It's not just a transfer saga. It's a human story
Right.
with a global backdrop.
Yeah, it really is. And it kind of makes you wonder, where is all of this heading? What will the future of rugby look like if more and more players, follow Sotutu's lead and start exploring these opportunities beyond their traditional borders?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think we're definitely seeing a shift. A shift in player priorities. The lines between national boundaries are blurring, and there's a growing emphasis on individual choice, you know?
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe this will lead to, even more exciting rivalries
Oh, absolutely.
or unpredictable tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, as fans, that's what we want, right? We want to see the best players in the world competing against each other,
Absolutely.
regardless of where they come from.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
If you were Hoskins Sotutu standing at this crossroads,
Mm-hmm.
what would your guiding star be? What
Right.
values, what ambitions, what dreams would lead you to your ultimate decision?
That's a great question. And I think it's one that's worth considering, not just for rugby fans, but for anyone who's, navigating their own path in life. Sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that take us beyond familiar territory
All right.
and challenge us to embrace the unknown.
Those journeys might just lead to a destination that's even more rewarding than we ever imagined.
Absolutely.
Well said. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the ever-changing world of rugby. But until then, keep those conversations going.
Mm-hmm.
Keep those minds engaged and keep that passion for the game alive.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.